everyone.
That's what I should do.
I'll make one final appeal. If anyone down the back wants to come up a little bit closer, and we group together. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. The 10 o'clock session on a Saturday morning after 2 heavy nights of partying is a tough draw. So for those of you who stayed up all night to be here, those of you who had an early night, thank you so much. I think those of you who are here, I think this is going to be a really rewarding, inspirational panel, given the heavyweights we have here in terms of what they're doing in innovation and building discovery technology. Those of you who are tweeting, we have a unique hashtag if you want to use it. It's hashtag ONA15Science, and you can use the general hashtag ONA15. We leave 20 minutes at the end for rapid fire questions and answers. So please, we do want to make sure there is a discussion at the end. We'll ask people to come up to the microphone in about 40 minutes time. So before I do introductions, I've been reading about Damien here, and I saw a particularly interesting quote from him in recent weeks, which was, people maybe rolling their eyes a little bit when we talk again about another company mining the social web. And I saw Damien make the comment that if there's a cage match coming, we can't wait. So I'm hoping maybe what we might get this morning is something of a little cage match between these guys, because they're all doing something that is incredibly unique and different and very, very powerful. We've seen, words described of crystal ball in terms of what they're doing and building really a God's eye view of the world on social. So to my immediate left, we have Ted Bailey, the CEO, founder, and chairman of Dataminer. We then have Damien Patton, founder and CEO of Banjo. And to our extreme left, we have Gregory Gittridge, Chief Content Officer with Vocative. And I thought where we might start this morning was to give you a quick preview, overview of what it is these guys do, and really put it to them to do their elevator pitch in 1 minute. So Ted, not that I'll hold you very tightly to 1 minute, but off you go. What is Dataminer?
Well, I just want to start punching you. It's going to be fun.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, we can just get right to it. We could just duke it out. But Dataminer is a company we founded 6 years ago in New York, and in the last 12 to 18 months came into the news industry. And essentially what we've solved for now 200 different newsrooms is finding breaking early pre-viral information across Twitter specifically, and building a product that can successfully integrate that into the workflows of now approaching 5,000 journalists across the industry. That was our initial product, and this year we'll be diversifying our product suite across the news landscape, bringing a lot of the capabilities that we developed in other verticals that'll range from, and I know I only have 60 seconds, that will range from a geo-exploration module to a historical archive to an API deployment to more advanced custom capabilities that enable you to build your own scenarios and get more differentiated and unique angles. We're really excited to be a tool provider for journalists to make them better at what they do.
Great, thank you. Damien, Banjo.
So Banjo is creating the world's first true crystal ball. It's the ability for all of us here to see everything that's happening in the world before anybody else even knows about it. We do that because we're able to capture the largest public data feeds in the world. Every major social network in the world, whether it's in China, America, Europe, we have their data feeds, as well as non-social, like whether it's drones or satellites or traffic data, all coming into one place. And within literally milliseconds, we're interpreting what's happening in every photo, video, tweet, post, text, and able to understand what's unique and what's happening there, and then able to get that information in literally seconds from the time someone took a photograph on their phone, understanding what's in that photograph, and write live on like NBC, for example. So that's Banjo.
Great,
Much less than 60 seconds.
Very good. Gregory, Vocative.
Vocative is a media and technology brand. We're consumer facing, so we create documentary TV series, we publish a website, and we've been investing heavily in content that's designed to live natively on Facebook and other social platforms. We have our own technology, and a big part of what we do is look out across the deep web, so the unindexed part of the internet, And we look for exclusive information, we look for emerging trends, we look for voices that otherwise would not be seen, or at least seen right away. What we're really interested in is how do we use technology and how do we use science to really tell great stories. And beyond the deep web, we're interested in everything from Internet of Things and sensors to drones and VR. We launched a new content strategy back in January, and we've completely changed how our newsroom is set up so that we have units of storytellers who come from different disciplines and backgrounds, and each unit has writers and video producers on them, but also data analysts and data visualization designers and growth editors, and they all work together to figure out the best ways to tell stories. So I'd say one of the biggest differences between the three of us is that we're very much a media and technology brand, but we're not using our tools to work with other companies or other journalists.
Great, thank you. And I guess that's one of the key differences here. Vocative, you've obviously your own technology, but it's a newsroom built on top of it. Do you consider, back to our cage fight, do you consider these guys competitors? And I suppose the same question to you, Ted, and to Damien.
I'm a big fan of Jimmy Snuka, and he was one of my favorite professional wrestlers, so like if you wanna, we can go at it that way. I knew this was gonna happen. No, I mean, I think we're impressed by what Banjo and what Dataminer have been doing. You know, I've known Ted for a year or so, got to meet Damien a few months back. And you know, what we're looking to do is, I think it's similar what Banjo and Dataminer are looking to do as well, is there's so much data that in the past you couldn't access, collect, see, monitor in efficient and interesting ways. And we love the idea of how do we use all that data to tell great stories. And the way that we've been going after that is how do we marry that with visual storytelling? So how do we do it in a way that uses video and data visualization and illustrations to make clear that the data just isn't statistics. It's not only numbers, it's all of us, and it's all of our interactions and how we behave. And by looking at it through that lens, we're able to see and tell great stories. And I think unlike Dataminer specifically, we're not set up to be the first people to alert you to breaking news. It's not how the brand and how the stories are focused. We're more interested in creating deep data coverage plans around certain areas of coverage, around developing stories, so we can do enterprise journalism, and we can do things that bounce off the news as opposed to alerting you to the news.
And Damien and Ted, picking that up, you know, what Gregory's talking about there is more kind of mining the social web. What you guys are really looking at is event detection. So what separates Dataminer from Banjo and Banjo from Dataminer?
I mean, look, I think that from Dataminer's perspective, we've tried to build exactly the capability and tools that are needed to make journalists better at different parts of their process. So, you know, essentially, you know, all journalists can take advantage, well, not all, but most, of early information, of more information sooner, of better information, of unique angles, of unique perspectives, of tools to help contextualize, verify, ways to find on-the-ground witnesses on social media, ways to help see what the potential scope of the popularity of a story might be, all of which are things that you can use social media data to better you know, achieve. So I think for us, instead of taking the approach of trying to build content and then have news organizations syndicate it, we're much more a tool and a technology creator, so that we can enable journalists in all the different parts of their process that we discover to be better and to integrate this data set as best as possible into essentially making them better journalists.
Okay. And Ted, picking that up, or Damien rather, the problem that Banjo is trying to solve, like you've talked a lot about visual listening. You know, and I've seen it written somewhere about journalists complimenting what Banjo has done, that it's almost turning their laptop into a drone. So what's the differential, I guess, with Dataminer, and what's the problem really Banjo is trying to solve?
I mean, I can't really speak to Dataminer. I mean, if you know me and my personality, I've never focused on anybody else except ourselves. So I've never looked at data miner, quite honestly, ever once. So I don't know. The reality of it is that I compete against myself every day. I wake up with a paranoia that someone else, 6 other people in the world are building what I am, and it drives me and myself and the team to create what's better. And then we give it out to people like yourselves, the journalists and the media to use, and you guys give us unfiltered feedback. Believe me, you're not scared to tell us when it's crap. And it's our job to make it so it's amazing. And so, you know, as far as, you know, what we're using it for, to your point, a drone, I mean, you know, to create the world's first crystal ball, it's obviously very difficult because there's no roadmap for this. You know, we do have one of the largest, you know, deep learning teams now in the industry, and what we're trying to always, you know, figure out from ourselves is how do we build a new technology that you've never seen that's going to aid you better to get the things faster first, but also just better information. And how do we find that better information? Does it have to have location with it? Does it have to have a text with it? Does it have to have photo with it? And does it have to come from a data source, or can you get it from multiple data sources? And that's been the challenge. Is, you know, now we get at least 1-2 major data sources a week that come to us and want to plug in their fire hose of information, whether it's a live, you know, video feeds from somewhere around the world, or it's a new social network popping up in China. And so just ingesting that amount of content, we call it the Air Traffic Control Center of real-time data. It's pretty impressive, but trying to solve, to get that information deciphered and get to you, whether it's in a foreign language or just in a video, is really difficult. But, you know, it basically comes down to you out there in the audience giving us feedback, and that's what we compete against, is that feedback.
And picking that up, Gregory, you know, the challenges when people see problems and they're critical, what are the big challenges you're encountering, you know, in terms of the platforms, being able to penetrate the platforms, extract information that's of value?
Sure, I think the challenges are, just like Damien said, I mean, we're looking to discover and tell stories in ways that people haven't before. So that means it's a messy process at times. Our best stories over the last 8.5, 9 months have all started with question, hypothesis. You know, wouldn't it be great if we could figure out where Tsarnaev's mom is and his relatives when the verdict comes down? Can we figure out who the most thanked person from the stage of the Oscars was in history? You know,
Who is it?
Steven Spielberg.
Really?
God was number 6. You know, can we access Marvel's database and do a gender analysis on it and figure out, like, are female superheroes getting their comic books quicker than male superheroes? So building the team that has that, you know, real journalism background, creativity, but wants to experiment and innovate, and everyone's trying to do that, and those are words everyone throws around, but I think it's, you know, not being upset when you go off in a certain path and it doesn't work, and then pausing and saying, all right, do we just scrap this, or is there something good here? And the Oscars story grew out of, we did a story back in January where we collected every State of the Union address archived by the Library of Congress all the way back to Woodrow Wilson. And our head of data science ran algorithms on it to figure out the grade level of the speech. And then we averaged every speech so that every president had a grade level associated with them. And we went all the way back and we saw Woodrow was talking to PhD candidates, and then as mass media came in over time and more people could vote, by the time Obama hit the mic, he was talking to sophomores in high school. So we had it all prepped, ready for when Obama released his State of the Union on Medium. Other people were digging through the speech to tell you what was in it, what was he going to say, what were the topics. We were running it through our process to figure out the grade level to get Obama's average. So 15 minutes into the address, we could publish our story. So out of that, we were like, yeah, it'd be great if we could do the same thing for the Oscars. And it would be amazing if we could figure out what the, you know, smartest and dumbest Oscar speech ever delivered were. So we spent a lot of time figuring this out, and they were basically all the same grade level. So there wasn't a great story there, but while we were doing that, one of our, actually a data intern, noticed that we could figure out who the most thanked people were. So we went back, redid a bunch of things, cleaned it up, and were able to figure out that God was 6, Spielberg was 1, and tell that story. And it's some things like you come up with an idea, like this last week, the first 24 hours the Pope was in America, collected every reference to blessed that we could, and then looked as to, by geography, what people were asking the Pope to bless. So found out in Philadelphia, like a third of the references were related to the Eagles. And in Washington...
But they need the help, that's why.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes sense. And in Washington, it was the metro system. So that was an idea that we had in the morning news meeting that came together within a couple hours that we published that day. Other things take weeks, other things take months, and I think it is the challenge of being okay that some things don't work.
Yeah. And challenges for a data miner, like you're incredibly reliant on Twitter. Are you over-reliant? Are you building for the day if they ever pull the API? What challenges do you face every day? So the reliance, do you come across privacy issues? People posting content then deleting it. What does that result for a data miner in terms of challenges day to day?
Yeah, I think Twitter really jumped out of the gate years ago as really becoming the first one-to-many platform that really scaled, creating really an extremely performative, from a data science perspective, new front line of information, equipping individuals to be out there, reporting events when they were first seen, like iconic moments like the plane on the Hudson really early crystallized that use case. I think today, those types of things happen every day, every hour, if not more regularly on Twitter. And we've been able to create a technology that can really detect all of those. And if you actually statistically put Twitter next to wires, not to belittle them because they're a different part of the information process, you actually will find breaking information on Twitter ahead of wires 80 to 90% of the time. So as a data source that connects the fragmented internet, but that also enables individuals to be reporters in a way, it is a very inclusive, very wide, very spanning data set. We send a ton of alerts at Dataminer on not Twitter, through Twitter, meaning many of the other platforms flow through Twitter, and much of the content that's published on other platforms that's meant to be broadcast is in fact tweeted, because that's one of the most performative ways to broadcast items. So we send hundreds of alerts on YouTube videos and Instagram pictures from Twitter. So I think that for us, while from a marketing perspective it sounds good to have more data sets, from an actual data perspective, it's certainly been up till recently, a lot of the place where there's a lot of the data. We continue to explore many other data sets, and we actually have 30 to contextualize Twitter outside of the space. We take in news feeds and actually correlate, is it in news or not? We look at many other data feeds across all of our verticals to actually contextualize, ascertain the relevance, and ultimately decide if something's actionable. In terms of our relationship with Twitter, it's extremely strong. We're integrated into TweetDeck. We work hand in hand with their news media team distributing the product. So those 200 newsrooms that have it, the majority of those came from Twitter and Dataminer distributing it jointly to them. So I see that relationship as as strong as it's ever been. So I think that we're always open and always expanding our data sets, and certainly will in the future continue to expand the data sets we have. But I don't see it as a risk based on those things.
And Damien, for you, and maybe this is something you can clarify, but at least the perception of Banjo is that you're incredibly reliant on people geotagging information when they're posting it, and that's how you're sourcing content. But it would still seem the percentage of content that is actually being geotagged is still very small. Maybe you tell us what is the data around that and the challenges that poses for Banjo as it's set up today.
Yeah, sure. So we pull in data from, as a lot of sources, and I would say, from what Ted said about, one data source being very powerful, I just totally disagree. Any one data source is weak, because you're only as strong as that one company can be for you, right? And Twitter is a great company, no doubt about it, but so are many other sources of information and data that's coming out there in real time. We're visual people. We see the world visually. We want to tell the world visually. And that's why we've spent so much of our time going away from text, where we can read text, we can read any sentence in real time, but reading what a photograph or a video is in real time, there's more videos and photos that are shared to break a news story than for example, just text on its own. So, as far as, as far as, what was your question about, about different from this?
Yeah, so in terms of just the amount of content that is actually geotagged, what's
sorry,
the data around that
yeah.
and the challenges that poses?
It would be, we do mostly geotagged content from all these sources. We don't rely on geotagged content. We have a way now of understanding where content is coming from now, the moment it's posted. Many of our partners that are sitting in this room know that now, that many things that don't have geotags on them or even inference of geo, we know exactly where that is in the world, and we're able to break the news story because of that. So, my job is to make sure that we aren't dependent on any one source or any one thing, and geo would be one thing. And so, again, you would be only as strong as geo. And so we spend a lot of time, like I said, in deep science trying to figure out how can you figure where that place is, what are those people talking about, what video is that sharing from, without explicit data being shared, so you can not have to worry about having one thing that could cripple your company if like geo went away, for example.
I touched on the word privacy earlier. Gregory, you might pick this up. Sometimes people don't realize that they're actually putting content into a public sphere. So do you ever come up against this where people are going, I'm a private citizen, I did not want my content to be found by Vocative? And just what are the red lines where, what content will you not maybe broach because you treat it as something that maybe is private?
Yeah, privacy is super important to us, and following all the, legal rules and regulations are vital. If somebody makes something private after it's been public, we detect that and delete it. We've also had people who have reached out to us, they haven't made it private, and they've asked us to not spotlight it in a story, and depending on the news value or the degree of the story, we have those conversations about what we should do ethically in the newsroom. Just to double back to the geo discussion, I would agree with Damien that, it's like 1% to 2% of Twitter is geotagged at this point. Like Instagram's a little bit more than that. There are things that I'm sure all of our technology does that helps us still figure out location, like profile information. In my profile, I reference Brooklyn topics that people are covering, so we can use that to glean more location. But our best stories come from using multiple data sets and a fusion of technology. And I think the one good example I can give on that would be the Tsarnaev story that we did, where our editorial director of news, Alex Koppelman, who happens to be in the audience, while the verdict was expected, we had one of our writers who speaks Russian and a data analyst who also speaks Russian build a coverage plan around could we find Tsarnaev's relatives on social media, talking, see what the discussion was, days before the verdict. And we were able to identify close friends, cousins, his mom's past posts through the technology, and then just tweak it and build out a bigger coverage plan. So in that, we realized that the mom in the past had been sharing videos for fundraising efforts. And in those videos for fundraising efforts, she had been sharing a Visa account number and had been sharing a telephone number. So we took that information we got from the technology and all the data analyst work that we did, and we wanted to verify the phone number was the mom. So we went to like a Russian phone directory that was basically cloud-based. So it was this number is in this many phones related to this name. And we had a fairly good sense that it was the mom based off of that. So the verdict comes down, and we tried calling the mom. She didn't answer. So we figured out she had a WhatsApp account, so we messaged her in Russian. And then we interviewed her for about 2 hours via WhatsApp. Identified ourselves as journalists, had a in-depth interview, but then we, despite all that, despite the fact that we had been following the public discussions of the relatives, that we had the media, that we had the phone number, that we had the directory, we wanted to make sure it was really the mom. So we then for another lengthy period of time, asked the mom to send us basically like proof of life. So we asked her to send us a picture of herself via WhatsApp holding something with that date on it. So we got that, and we ended up with this exclusive interview with Sarvnea's mom responding to the verdict that married not only our technology and our data expertise, but married like really good investigative and dogged beat reporting. And there are many examples like that over the last 8 months that, to me, I grew up as a beat reporter in New York City for the New York Daily News, like knocking on doors, and then I went and chased documents and did FOIA requests and, worked in a police bureau and all that. And like, to have this technology that we can use in the service of journalism and storytelling is where I get the most excited, and where I think the people at Vocative get the most excited. And we use it not just for daily journalism and enterprise and investigation stuff, but we also use it for really incredible documentary work and video work too, that I think if we relied on one slice of data, like geo or other things, none of that would be possible. And as every day goes by, something else emerges, and we need to figure that out. So like Internet of Things is definitely going to be the next huge data set, and figuring out how to tap into that is, a huge, huge opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to echo, I think geoprediction for us, at least over the last 5 years when we've been perfecting, or rather evolving our geoprediction model, is certainly one of the most important core sciences. So, as I think they said, 1 to 3% of tweets are tagged with an explicit latitude and longitude. We now predict at a city level the location accurately of 60 to 70% of tweets. So we bring 3% to almost 70. And that's a science that's taken a long time. We have a team that's run machine learning models. The key to actually perfecting a geoprediction model for us has been creating about 25 different factors that actually describe the tweet, the user, the co-occurring activity, but also using 10 to 15 other data sets outside of Twitter. The best way to locate a tweet is not a YouTube video. The best way to locate a tweet is a database of known locations, of many other things that actually have geo information in them. So, we've actually developed a huge repository of geo information. And geo is not just something that powers our map products, where you can pull up and see those messages on a graph, but also an extremely core attribute in just general event detection. When you're essentially clustering together tweets in an early moment, them being from the same place is one of the best indicators of it being a real world event, as opposed to a digital event, as opposed to a meme, as opposed to viral content, which has a geo distribution that's much more spread out.
Okay. And Damien, in terms of, maybe it's not for Banjo, but where do you see a lot of expansion, like closed networks, private group messaging, even the dark web? Is that something that you can see Banjo? Do you see a lot of kind of expansion into these other areas?
So it goes back to your previous question about privacy that we didn't talk too much about up here. I mean, the answer to that is, privacy, I don't know that there's anything more important, quite honestly, as we deal with all this data. For us, and I challenge the two to my left and my right, for their companies, I mean, we filed a patent on how to protect users' privacy at an extreme level, because it's so important that the sources of this content that we're getting, it continues to flow, and people, they need to feel that there's a trust. And I know the social companies, all of them that we work with, they like the fact that we are so proactive in making sure that a user's content is public, and then if it's ever turned private, that it's wiped out of databases instantaneously. In fact, there's many of our customers sitting here who will tell you they've had stuff ready to go on air. Customer changed their status, and immediately we deleted it out of their database. And so, for getting to the point about sources, and it comes all to privacy for us. And so for Banjo, we only take public data, and we're offered private data constantly. Almost daily. And some of these really rich sources where, for myself, as the founder and CEO, I'd love to see what that private data married with all the other data around the world could do for us. But, for right now today, and I'll never say never, but for right now today and in our past, we stick with public data. And so, those are going to be our sources and for now and for the foreseeable future.
Ted or Gregory, pick that up, the dark web, private messaging, closed networks. Is that an area where you could see?
I mean, look, with all information sources, there are different types of information that I think could be interesting for journalists, right? I think where we've focused is on the absolute tip of the public side, right? I mean, if you think of public Twitter, you actually have something that isn't just public from the perspective of, oh, gee, if I go to a website, there it is. It's public from the perspective of, arguably the act of tweeting is akin to standing up in a public square and saying, can anyone hear what I'm saying right now? Please listen to me. So I think, our company is focused on absolutely the most public of public data sets and really, developed a lot from that. Completely agree with Damien. Companies approach us all the time with data sets that are private. I think that, as a data science company, you have a responsibility to not just, take advantage of what's available to you and what you can commercially get from the company based on their ethics. You have the responsibility to interpret what you want your ethics to be and decide not just what's available, but what you use and why. And I think that nothing could be more important. And we've always strived to be the most safe. And that's why we've focused on one-to-many open broadcast. Over the coming years, there will be more and more pseudo-public data sets that are public in the sense of the fact that you can commercially get them and that users, if they read a privacy agreement on page 35 of the manual that they don't read, it says it's public. And there will be a lot of data to glean from that. And I think that there will be companies which exploit that, and there will be some interesting information in that area for journalists. It's not something we will tackle for our own ethical reasons, but it will be continuously, I think, a more challenging data landscape, something that's more ambiguous with respect to what actually is private or not, and certainly something that all data mining technologies need to really focus in on and be mindful of.
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, we only access public data, and there's no shortage of it. I mean, the amount of public data that is being created is massive, and as I was mentioned before, we're looking at everything, from should we deploy our own sensors to do stories, whether it's investigative or enterprise? How do we tap into unstructured, dynamic databases that anybody can access, but because of our tools and data expertise, we can sort and structure and look at more easily. So that ranges from, we did a story about drug sales on the dark net where we used our own robots to go in and scrape all the information we could for drugs being sold over a certain period of time, and then we built a structured database that showed the type of drug, the origin of the seller, what country they were in, and how much it was being sold for in bitcoins. And then we were able to look at that and tell a story that most of the pot on the dark net during that period of time was being sold by Americans. And then every time we want to update that database, we can run the same robots again and technology and pull in more data to traditional databases like the FEC database. If you've ever tried to play with that, is a giant mess that's updated infrequently. It's inconsistent data entries. It's PDFs. It's just not fun in any way to go through. So we did a great story a few months back where we pulled in 400,000 records from FEC. We ingested the information in two separate ways so that we can compare and contrast them. So we used the API in one, we used the download in another one, and we figured out who were the 60-ish people who had donated at least $1,000 both to Jeb and to Hillary, and then went and interviewed them and ended up partnering with the Daily Beast on the story. So I think from government databases, to the dark net, to Internet of Things, to social. There's so much public data available, and it's figuring out how we use that and really respect the privacy of everything else.
And Damien, given the amount of public data we have, I look back on something like the Arab Spring. My company, Storyful, was born out of it. But traditional journalists, we didn't see that story coming. We didn't see the incredible movement of people until the rising was upon us. With the technology today, Banjo, you know, how you're built out across the world, do you think we would have detected that almost before the event, if it happened now?
Guaranteed. I mean, I can tell you just, I mean, if you remember what happened in Ukraine last year and began actually the year before. I mean, Banjo detected it when there was a couple people in Independence Square in Kiev. And then no one in America even knew about that until months later, as it really grew into something where the world was paying attention to it. Or with the umbrella protest in China. Again, it started with a couple students, and one of our photo detection things detects people that are gathering in this space in a nature where it's unique, and that picked up the umbrella protest as well, and which weeks later became this big thing. So it's no different than the Arab Spring. And even more to the point, like things that happened in Benghazi, what really happened in Benghazi, or you know, the downing of the Malaysian Airlines, you know, over Ukraine, like what really happened and how that happened in real time. So yeah, I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, that stuff's happening now every day, where the technology, not just with us, but technology in general, is progressing so fast. It's such at an exponential rate today. I mean, imagine if a black and white TV was invented today, and you know, color TV would be invented this afternoon. That's how fast we're growing in technology. It's so exponential. So yeah, the answer is just of course. It just might not be readily apparent because it's not maybe publicly available to the masses yet. And that's what I know all of us up here are trying to work on and do. But the answer is simple. It's of course.
And similar question, Ted. Like, let's say data miner have been pulling in very early information, event detection, Arab Spring, Ukraine, etc. How though do you make the leap of going to a journalist and saying, we have this incredible content we're pulling in here, that they can trust it, verify it? Like, is there anything that data miner is doing within newsrooms to go, we have pulled this cohort of information together, you now need to verify it, but we're pretty confident this is real, it's authentic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two things I want to focus on. One is, you know, completely agree with Damien, believe it or not. And
Well, I'm not the one who threatened violence in the beginning of this thing, Ted.
well,
You did put me in a headlock.
I know. That was out of love.
Yeah.
well, you know, I was scared of the crystal ball, you know. But
You should be.
yeah, I know. So on that note, actually, somewhat, you know, one of the interesting things about social media, amongst many interesting things about social media, is that the intersection of social media and riots and protests is one of the most world-changing intersection points that the data sets produced. And Arab Spring really was a moment where that came to light, in the sense of the fact that arguably, if you talk to many scholars and many different studies of the event, the accelerant of social media in that situation may have even played a role as to catalyze the situation to bubble over a line at which a government was overthrown, or not, or maybe it just sped it up. If you talk about something like Ferguson, you can argue similarly that this was an event that social media made. And as you actually look at the data in Ferguson and actually look at how that transpired, you see that the event happened, there was social media activity, and individuals took pictures. And for 2 hours, this story got a little local traction and was following the same arc as a local story follows just about every time when something tragically like that happens, and it does not become at the scale of Ferguson. And essentially, hours in, what happened was there was a wave of attention on the national level that really was intertwined with social media, influencers in the digital landscape, that essentially catapulted what may have been a local story that never gone anywhere into probably a world-changing, if not country-changing event, series of events, and political movement. So I think that the power of the intersection of social media and political instability is such an unbelievably ripe area. So at Data yes, we detect that information early and alert on it early, and yes, we alerted on Ferguson like we alerted on many things early, but Ferguson wasn't Ferguson until later. And being able to provide the tools to actually monitor that. Data not only alerts, but we provide updates, and when we send those updates out to customers in a month when we release a new product, those updates will all be on a timeline, so you can actually see the story as it evolved and link the alerts together. But essentially, we follow the story, so we warn you, and then we essentially bring you every moment in time as that evolves, with a variety of analytics and tools such that you can continue to predict where it is on that arc so that you could see something that is like that becoming something to the degree of Ferguson. And I think that from a science perspective, the data is extremely predictive in the sense of the velocity of uptick across the social environment that is like the patterns in those areas are actually very predictive factors in a complex multivariable prediction model. So it's very scientifically predictive. When you talk about source verification and verification of information, I think there's this perception across the industry that's been common that I've encountered, that we've all encountered, that social media is risky because you can't verify it and it's not reliable. And I think obviously that's the case, and when someone calls you and says, I have a tip, it's extremely not reliable either, until you find another source and you do your job and you're a journalist. So I think that it maybe is a misperception born out of an old time, but I think yes, we provide source analysis tools. When you open a DataMiner alert or open our platform, you can see the history of a user. You can see many attributes. You can see where they've been. You can see the topics they've been influential in. You can see their digital activity. We're continuing to expand that module, all to make you better at essentially figuring out who this is before you rely on them. But you can also then open a map and look and say, well, what else is going on there? Is this real? Did this happen? And then look for other sources and reach out to them and use the data set actually as a very effective means to verify, ironically, given the bad rap that social media gets. So I think, yes, our tools really focus on that. There is a lot of value in social media in verification. Take away the other value and just say, pretend you weren't allowed to use social media for event detection, you weren't allowed to use it for data analysis, you were just allowed to use it for verification. It would still be a staple of the news process because it would be an incredibly valuable way to get corroborative evidence as to what's happening.
Okay, great. At this point, hopefully we have some questions from the audience. If anyone wants to come up to the microphone, hopefully somebody will come up, or just raise your hand if you're shy about coming to the mic. While you're getting your thoughts together, question I might put to you, Damien, is it strikes me obviously there's incredibly rich content emerging from all of you guys, but there's obviously insights and intelligence that I imagine non-news operators would love to get their hands on. Are there any clients that you would not work with, that you would feel uncomfortable with? But then secondly, is that where there is a market now? It is more the insights and intelligence as opposed to really drawing content that journalists are going to turn into stories.
Yeah, I mean, the government, we don't work with them, period. I mean, we're probably the most advanced, in fact, I know we are, the most advanced photo and video recognition system on the planet, at least the fastest. And so we get visited by them constantly, and I refuse to work with them, period. I'm a two-time war vet. So it's not that it doesn't come from out of patriotism, but again, it comes from public data and how people perceive that we're using their data in order to do these things. And you have to just draw within yourself of what do you think is ethically right or wrong. And it's not my job to tell TED what they should do with their stuff. I don't know what they do with their stuff, but for us, we just won't work with government agencies. And in fact, I mean, we're pretty public of the people we do work for. And then your second question is insights, and yeah, of course. I mean, that's the biggest thing. I mean, we alert people all day, every day. I mean, probably every minute, a massive amount of alerts going out, and we've never sent out one false positive ever, zero. And that's because we have a way of verifying the content in the newsroom. As soon as they get it, they know they can go live on air, live to story. And that's a real big importance to us to the tech, and it comes from the insights. Many of the things that Ted talked about was how we verify, but we have a lot of other technology that we deploy to make sure it's verified, that now our news partners here in this room and social partners here in this room now trust when it comes out of us. They know it's accurate.
Okay. Gregory, in terms of the year ahead, any early trends you're seeing? What is your data telling you when it comes to elections, events that we're seeing on our calendar coming up? Is elections something that's starting to play well amongst the millennial? What are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, elections are definitely top of mind. I mean,
Who's going to win?
Can't tell you. Our audience is I think 67% of our audience is 34 and younger. We over-index on men versus women. Our global stories do exceptionally well for us. So our ISIS coverage, coverage of migrants, the Ukrainian coverage, but then so do gender and identity stories. And it's because the audience that we're talking to and that we're growing is very globally minded, but also grew up in a time of not only tumult from 9/11 to ISIS to the recession, but it's just massively connected. And as Damien was saying, like, information travels so quickly, change happens so instantaneously. So by telling stories about the changing world, and in many cases, like, what are we becoming, that does super well for us. So politics fits nicely in that, but we try to cover politics through the lens of national security, through the lens of gender, through the lens of identity, communities. We're not building a team to go on the trail or to cover moment to moments about the debates. Through it all, it's how do we use technology and science to tell great stories. It's like one of our better political stories was there was a scientific study that came out that showed American voters respond to candidates differently based on the pitch of their voice. So we took the first GOP debate, figured out the pitch of every candidate's voice, overlaid it on the scientific study, and did a big data visualization showing you the pitch of every GOP candidate's voice. Again, it was an enterprise story based off of data, science, or technology that bounced off of the news. So things like that do well for us.
Okay, we have some questions. Great. Go ahead, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kim Bowie. I'm with Reportedly. I have a question for Greg, a little bit sort of sausage making. Using one of the examples that you've given us today, can you walk us through a little bit of how you guys decide to dig deep into something, and when you decide, and how much time technically you're devoting to building something to dig further, and how many people are working on that?
Yeah, so back in January when we set on the new content strategy, we set the newsroom up to focus on certain beats that we knew would resonate with the audience that we were targeting, so the audience that I just talked about, but also that in the previous year or so of Vocative's existence, we knew that data was presenting itself and that we could use to tell great stories. So we have a national security team, and that team is run by Jamie Tarabay. She was the Baghdad bureau chief for NPR. She was a foreign correspondent in Jerusalem and in Asia. And on her team, there are writers and data analysts, data viz, video producers. So every day, Jamie and that team, and every moment, talk about what are we looking at, what do we want to cover. Some of it, and we build big coverage plans. So we're constantly looking at forums, areas where ISIS extremists gather, share information, prep propaganda. And because we set up those coverage plans, it's like old beat reporting. Sometimes you walk in and there's 3 or 4 things like, oh, that's a story, we want to do that, we want to do that. The bigger, more interesting things, again, come out of that hypothesis. So when Jamie joined us, one of the questions she wanted to answer is, what is ISIS really focusing its propaganda on? So there's no database, right? There's no like ISIS propaganda Excel file. So we worked together with the analysts on her team, and for a 6-week period, literally collected every piece of propaganda ISIS shared from various web forums, in Arabic, in English, in other languages. And then we used our technology to sort through it and figured out, I'm going to not get the percentages exactly right, but like 92% was aimed at Iraq and Syria. The rest was aimed at the West. The propaganda that was aimed at the West was scary, beheadings, threats, violence. The propaganda aimed at Iraq and Syria was roads, medicine, amusement parks reopening, welfare, charity. So then we had our own data set that we were very clear with the audience where we got it from, where it was collected, and then Jamie did a great narrative story, taking videos and things that we never get to see in the West, like ISIS opening an amusement park and giving out candy to kids in Syria, and brought all of her expertise to that. So that took 2 months to do. So like any newsroom, we make judgment calls based off of what we think has a good angle or good story, and then every unit has a growth editor, and we, just like we use data to find and tell stories, we love data around how do we optimize our distribution and engagement. So we've gone from about 80,000 fans on Facebook to 450,000 over that 8-month period. Because we've got a great growth team. It's not like, and now we find the social media editor and give them the story. From every step of the process, the growth editor is involved in helping us figure out, what our audience is talking about, caring about, interested in, and then we use that data to help us tell stories.
Great, thank you. Next person.
Hi, I'm Kathleen McIlroy. I'm now a professor at Oklahoma State, but I used to be in newsrooms and did online journalism, so I am, pro all of this, but I'm gonna try to disrupt the disruption here. What data journalism can do, data is something, but it's the documented world. It's not the world, it's the documented world, correct? So how clear do you make it to your audience that, like in the case of ISIS and propaganda and things like that, or the speeches, that this is something and we can make these statements, have these theses about this. But a lot of some of the other stuff you guys are talking about is the documented world. And you're making these broad statements about the world. So, and I look at the stories and I talk to my students, well, yes, this is true. This is a social construction of news, just in that old-fashioned sense of what news is. So I'm just curious to hear you, how you work through, like, here's this revelation. We can say, yeah, this is all data journalism, but are you making it clear in your stories, and I've just been reading a whole bunch of them, that this is based on something. It's not the world. Does that make sense?
I think I understand the question. So we use all the data, all the information that we find, and we marry it with field reporting, with picking the phone up, with interviews to tell stories, and then we are as transparent as possible in terms of what data we're measuring. So like on the ISIS propaganda story, we very clearly said, this is where we looked, this is what we measured, this is how we did it. And for me, it's, and again, I grew up, as a 19, 20, 21-year-old, I was a runner for the New York Daily News. And I would go and I'd knock on doors and I'd ask everybody the same question, and I'd fill up my notebook, and then I'd call back to the rewrite desk and I'd dump them a bunch of notes, and they would use the best quote, and they would use like all the information I got, but there was no like systematic way to look at reaction, sentiment. There was, probably more difficult to figure out, did someone really see it, or were they passing along information?
And I guess what you're saying, what you're doing is actually more transparent and more systematic. And maybe my question is more at, Ted and Damien a little bit, because I get the type of work, but it's like if you say, I am creating a crystal ball, and I want to say you're creating a crystal ball of a documented world, not of the world.
I would just say that's not true. It is the world. The documented world is the world. What we're showing journalists, for them to go and create a story on, for them to tell their community, it's what's happening right now. Sure, it's in a document form. It's either, whether it's a tweet, whether it's an Instagram photograph or a Facebook post, whatever the case may be, but that's the world. That's what's happening right now. That's the lens that we see things through today. Like I said, it used to be either black and white TV or it used to be the newspaper today, our lens is through social. Our lens is through our fellow human beings that are out there seeing it and documenting what's happening around the world today. And I won't speak for Ted, but for us, it's just about finding that information and then giving it to you, whether you're a professor at a university or whether you're a member of the media, and then you decide what you want to do with it. But it's first getting you information, right? It's what you said, the documentation of the world. But I would just argue that the documentation is the world. This isn't something that happened historically and that someone's just sitting in a room writing up. This is what your fellow human being, whether they're sitting next to you or halfway across the world, this is what they're experiencing right now.
I mean, I would say you asked a really interesting question. I think that in media forms of the past, that were not citizen generated, it was very easy to say, well, this is a conceived representation of something by a particular entity. When you get down to the social media revolution, or whatever you want to call it, you have a much more raw, much more granular, better sense of ground truth coming from a lot of situations that weren't documented in that way, preceding that information valve. That being said, it is an incredibly biased data set, right? It's a data set that's dependent on human interpretation. It's a data set that's dependent on where people have particular internet platforms and how they use them. It's a data set that skews towards many different behavioral attributes and publishing attributes. And I think to develop the best tools for journalists to make use of it, you have to be able to harness the best of those qualities and be able to visualize and expose those biases in ways that it can be part of the process, not a definitive really anything.
Oh, okay, thank you. That makes perfectly good sense. So I appreciate that.
Great. One more question. Great. Thank you.
Hi, Laura Weitzman-Yost from Fusion. I was really interested in what you were talking about, how you track down the mother and getting the photo. And that's the best kind of journalism, but we all know on a daily basis when we're using social media and getting sources, there's not always the time to do that kind of follow-up. And I'm wondering how you sort of balance the quotes and the things from Facebook and other sources in that real time.
Yeah, I think we make judgment calls just like newsrooms have made judgment calls based off of evidence that you have and the reporting you've done. So in the Tsarnaev mom case, we weren't comfortable that we were actually talking to her until we had that picture. I mean, it was very, 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 very likely it was her for all the data reasons I said, but we wanted to verify it. Earlier, we were the first news organization, media brand in January to discover the video of the Paris grocery store gunman pledging allegiance to ISIS. And we published that story at like 3:30 in the morning on a Sunday. And when we found that, it was a Daily Motion video. It was clearly the attacker. He was dead at this point. But his picture had been released. And we translated it. He was pledging allegiance to ISIS. But we also, the way we found it was being shared on ISIS forums that in the past had shared ISIS propaganda prior to it reaching the West and had prepped it. And we knew, based off of the people who were sharing it initially, that it was in the hands of ISIS. So on that, there's no one to call. There's no, you can't pick the phone up and verify it. So we made the decision that based off of who was sharing it, what was in the video, and what the people sharing it had done in the past, and the location it was being shared in, that it was legitimate, and we published it. And I think it was 3 hours later, Site Intel and the AP, using similar methodology, published a similar story. So it's story by story, it's case by case, and I think as Ted said, we gather as much evidence as we can using technology, just like journalists for generations have gathered evidence in multiple sources before we decide to go with something.
Great. Maybe in 30 seconds each, and we'll wrap up now. This time next year, fast forward 12 months, what will be the things that we'll have been talking about? New innovations, changes, where are we going to see the expansion for your respective companies? Ted?
Well, for data miners, I think I mentioned at the beginning, this year we're going to bring many new products into the news space, which we're really excited about. And we have a great alerting product that's really now used far and wide. And we're going to bring really, dramatically larger set of capabilities spanning historical analysis to real-time analysis to API deployment that enables really a broader set of use cases. So I would hope that by this time next year, a lot of the people in the room will be using many new things, many new data sets that will be integrated into Data-Miner, many new ways to leverage this amazing data set, and we'll have some success stories that I can talk about.
Damien?
As you probably can tell from the time I've sat up here, I'm not much into pitching product. I rarely ever get up on stage and talk about Banjo. I just let it speak for itself. So I'll let it speak for itself over the next year. All I can tell you is, much like Google gave us search, right? And it's free and it's very powerful. And a decision was made not too long ago that I decided that the crystal ball is very powerful. Next year will be exponentially powerful, and that we will give that. We're going to give a lot of that power for free to the media, and I think you guys have seen that here. And so I'll just let you try it for yourself over the next year. We're going to roll out a lot of the power that we have internally today. We're going to roll that out for free so that the media and journalists all over the world, whether it's from a classroom to a broadcasting studio to the big social networks, can be using the power of this.
Great. Gregory, in 30 seconds.
We're hiring, so we need
Okay.
we need data editors, we need data analysts, we need data visualization, and we need writers, we need video producers, and it's a great place to be. We also Damien was telling me I should wear a sandwich board that says that on. But we need journalists and creative thinkers who, again, want to figure out different ways to discover great stories and tell great stories. And we're looking for people who want to be in a startup environment, but want to rise to that kind of creative challenge of what's the best way to figure this out, to tell this story, and then how do we do it in a really visual way. And that visual storytelling is what's really working for us when it comes to videos, and from documentary series to native videos for Facebook to data visualization. So, we're big expansion in the next few months heading our way.
Great, thank you. To Gregory, Damien, Ted, these guys will be staying around. I think Damien has to run off, but Data-Miner and Banjo do have teams in the midway for anyone who wants demos and trials. Same for Storyful, I should say. Will you please give a round of applause to our incredible panel? Thank you so much, one and all. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you.